This is Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. We're here on Nintendo Switch. Be sure to like the video, subscribing is great as well. So this is the return of a pretty well-loved entry in the Xenoblade franchise. So this one takes place in the future, I think it's like 2050 something. And basically there's a big alien clash that goes on above Earth. Earth gets destroyed, and a bunch of, well, basically escape colonization pods go off into the worlds beyond, and you're part of that group that is New LA, so New Los Angeles, and you are basically a amnesia-oriented individual that you create with various customization options, and you will basically make your way using a selection of like class, and then improving yourself, leveling, getting new perks and abilities, and creating a team that is equipped and ready to handle the problems and the challenges that you will face as you battle across the planet here, putting down various pillars to expand your territory and create fast travel points. And just a general narrative that you need to occasionally do some level gaps to kind of get towards the next spot, and then, you know, over time you go from kind of just shooting on the ground to becoming someone that can enjoy the perks of, say, a Titan-esque thing, which they have a special skills name to this one. And yeah, it's kind of like a role-playing, like it's an RPG game, so you go about, like I said, leveling, exploring, and visiting a place. This one is rather interesting here on the Switch because it's definitely, you know, it's a definitive edition, so it's like a remastering. And it is taking things, I would say, a step further in terms of, you know, the technology and the visuals and stuff like that. It's not necessarily like a massively evolved thing over what came before, but I do think it is kind of a nice visual upgrade and gameplay upgrade for those wanting to revisit this game, or those that didn't play it before. Because, like, I guess from what I understand, is Xenoblade is a series that is traditionally more of like a swords kind of magic kind of thing. Like, I played, I think it was an early look at the Switch in like PAX 17, which would have been like September 17, and they showed me a Xenoblade, and it was like you're on floating islands and there's swords and stuff, and I was just like, that's what I was kind of expecting going into this one. I was like, oh, there's mechs and everything. I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is different. So that's just some context backstory where I was like, oh, I was a little surprised by this, but actually not bad. The gameplay, it takes a long time to kind of get into it. Like, this isn't necessarily too far in, but kind of at the point, a little bit after the point where it sort of opens up and allows you to actually, like, really explore and enjoy the game, and, you know, do stuff and build up a team and connect with others online. There's like 32 player sort of like soft integrated multiplayer connectivity going on, which is intriguing. You could play offline. There's an option, you get to choose how you do it, and then you can have it ask you every time you go and play the game too, and, you know, totally up to you. But yeah, it's just kind of a neat sort of thing. But yeah, there's just a lot of like exposition and cinematics, like way too much, and they recap like over and over and over and over again in the first bit of the game, which is genuinely annoying. Like, they just blab on and on and on and on. It's way too much. It should have been cut down because it's genuinely way too much. So from a technical perspective, I'm sure you're kind of wondering, dynamic 1080p, and it's 30 FPS. There are definitely some performance drops when you're playing the game, for sure. It's not too bad. Like, you won't, I don't think you'll really notice it, but there's definitely performance drops in this, and there's like a little bit of frame pacing, but yeah, for the most part, you know, a little bit dynamic, 1080p, 30 FPS. There is quite a bit of popping that's noticeable, which is expected. Loading is pretty quick, pretty brief. You know, the game itself looks kind of fine. It does exhibit the usual, like, honestly, at this point, you know what this Nintendo Switch is capable of, I would hope. So it's not out of the realms of everything you would expect from a Nintendo Switch game in terms of, like, visual quality, fidelity. Like, it is jaggedy, it is blurry, it's, you know, it's your typical Nintendo Switch game, but I would say that it is a little bit, you know, kind of cleaner running, a little bit better looking. I love the visual aesthetic of it. It reminds me a lot of, like, Phantasy Star. If you're familiar with that, like Phantasy Star Universe, stuff like that. Like, it's definitely got a neat vibe and aesthetic going on for it. And then, yeah, I love the world, but I'm just kind of, like, looking at it, and I'm like, oh, it would be so... The best thing I can describe it is I really wish this was running at higher resolution with a higher frame rate, and I think this would be actually, like, a pretty good-looking game. Like, I think the art kind of style and direction and the gameplay mechanics and stuff like that kind of lend itself to being very clean and beautiful if it had, like, a higher, like, output and stuff. Like, you can definitely, you know, tell, like, you can't really right now because it's during the day, but at night there'd be, like, an Aurora Borealis, there'd be all these, like, big planets you could see, and they look majestic, is what it is. It's like a beautiful, you know, kind of backdrop and styling, and it's just, the hardware just isn't here to, like, really do justice to a remaster like this, if that makes sense. Like, it's good, you know, it's a good remaster, quote-unquote, for what the Switch can do, but, like, yeah, it genuinely kind of feels like the Switch is sort of, like, not really fully up to the task, if that makes sense, for really delivering on this one from, like, a jump in technology. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. But, like, you know, the art direction, the visual sci-fi of it, it looks so cool. Yeah, genuinely, like, it's quite nice to look at. Moving clouds, lots of creatures, lots of things going on. It's yeah, it's an impressive game. Like, it is kind of, from that perspective, pretty impressive, but you can definitely see, like, the holdbacks and stuff. I don't know how good this looks from a video viewing perspective, but yeah, it's definitely got some visual charm to it, and I think, you know, there is potential for this one to really kind of be great looking in that, and hopefully down the line for a Nintendo Switch 2 we get to see this one pushed a little bit further, because I think that's all this really needs, is just frame rate and resolution, and you'd be cooking pretty good on this. So yeah, the gameplay, amnesia, you come in, you don't know what's happening, and you are now going out into the world and trying to figure out you know, what exactly is going on, how you fit into this new colony, and then you battle. And as you've been seeing for combat, it is sort of a live turn-based battle. So you will be using abilities and healing things, arts, everything like that, in order to battle against the enemies. So it basically kind of plays itself. It would have worked fine as a third-person shooter, quite honestly, but yeah, you're just kind of, like, lightly doing inputs, but you can, like, oh, I see this guy, you know, I'm aiming for the head, but you could, like, press Y and aim for, like, the tail and stuff like that, or the different pieces of the body, kind of however you want to go about it. And then you get various ability attacks that you can unleash, and they're just to a degree commanding your crew of characters that you have, your party, as you battle. Like, it's a pretty straightforward type of combat. Like, it's pretty easy, or like easygoing. Like, I wouldn't say there's anything too grueling about playing and experiencing this game in terms of, like, challenge or difficulty. There's definitely, like, a lot of, you know, lore going on. There's a lot of loot to collect. The UI kind of stuff could have used a big bump up, honestly, in terms of, like, the best I can describe it is there is, like, 4 billion, like, hundreds of items of, like, clothing and stuff you can choose between, and armor and that, and it's just, like, question mark, and you have to just sit there scrolling forever to get to, you know, the next piece of clothing, and you're like, this is ridiculous. So that could have been, some of the UI stuff could have been enhanced a little bit, I think, or cleaned up, and some folders and stuff, something like that, just, yeah. But I do think they've actually got, like, a really distinctly unique game, and the map is decently large, and it's sort of split into hexagons, similar to, like, say, a Civilization game, where you've got the different, like, plates or Panzer General. That's an older one, but you know, where you got these hexagonal plates across the map, and that's sort of your setup as you are exploring. So you go and you set up like these pillars at these different places, and then you can use the pillars to fast travel to these places, and you expand your territory, and you explore new places, and you level up, and you get access to new things, and you see new stuff, and you fight larger and larger giant like creatures, and then there's some other twists and turns in regards to the challenges and other things you might see in this world. It's really, really quite cool. And then there's just this incredible bumping soundtrack going on the whole time, which is just absolutely fantastic. Like, I'm assuming you're hearing some of the music occasionally. I don't know if I had to cut it out when you're watching this as far as, like, copyright claims. I have no idea, but the music is just, like, it is some of the most random, but also cool music I think I've seen in a video game. Like, it's just, like, it's straight up bizarre. Like, you'll be doing this really overly long conversation that really should end a lot sooner than it does, because they just go, like, on and blab and blab and blab. They really need to work on condensing the narrative in this series, like, honestly. Like, it's just, like, I expect, you know, in these types of games, I expect some level of, like, you know, discussion and RPGs. Like, that's just what an RPG is, right? Like, there's chatter, there's discussion, there's things that go on. Yeah, I genuinely do anticipate and expect that in these types of games, but this one is a little ridiculous. Like, it goes on way too much with the discussion and chatter, where you're just like, a lot of it I'm just like phasing out, and then you know, they'll be like blasting like this intense like karaoke kind of music going on in the background. It's just like really crazy, and you'll be like, this doesn't match this at all, but it's awesome. It's like the music's cool, the atmosphere is cool. It feels like a really kind of impressive, to a degree, remaster that's sort of locked behind like hardware that's sort of being really pushed. Like, it's running fine and it looks fine, honestly. Like, it's not bad looking and stuff. It's just like, you can definitely see where if this was available on like something else, it would be really, really quite, like, I think that would make it shine a bit more, is what I'm trying to get across. Like, it's really good for a Switch game, like, you know, port-wise and stuff like that. You can definitely see, like, they're, you know, you might have different thoughts on the art direction adjustments and stuff, because it's a definitive edition, but, like, technically it is, I guess you would say, like, boundary pushing and stuff, as far as, like, large open worlds and Nintendo style. I got insta-killed by the wood skirpo. I was just, why did it kill me first? I'm just trying to, like, hop around and live my best, you know, life and Xeno life and stuff. I'm back here. Heavy rain will impact our ability to do stuff. Well, good thing we're dressed for the beach. So, yeah, it's definitely got like a vibe to it, I would say. Like, it genuinely has an interesting vibe, an interesting style, an interesting world and lore, and it's cool. Like, the opening sequence, they must have spent a lot of money on the opening sequence, because they've reused the footage like 3 or 4 times over in like the first hour of the game, and you're like, seriously? But yeah, no, they've really kind of got something. I didn't want to come down here all the way, that sucks. They've got something cool here, like universe-wise, gameplay-wise, aesthetics. It's a very, very neat world, is the thing I'm trying to get across, is like, from what I was playing of it, I'm like, oh, this is really, really cool. And I wanted to talk a bit more of it, because I was, like, to a degree, having fun. Like, when I'm out here doing this stuff and kind of moving along, I'm like, this is actually quite interesting. You know, it's definitely, it's got like a charm to it. And I am, you know, I am very, like, I'm curious about the full scope of this one. I'm curious about if they've got some plans to push this a little bit further on the Nintendo Switch too. I would assume so, based on what I was hearing about some things behind the scenes on this one. You know, hidden in there some higher uncapping and stuff. I think this will be a pretty good sort of launch thing. And, you know, gameplay-wise, as far as story, you gotta, you know, as I was saying earlier, there's like level cap stuff, but you move through the narratives, you talk to different characters, do side missions, there's affinity missions, and then you just kind of build up your battle across the story as you aim to deal with the local alien problems, and then maybe also some other problems. Like, I'm trying not to spoil some things. There may be, like, obviously there's a big conflict that happened on around Earth and stuff, and those conflicts tend to continue no matter where you go. You know, you can't seemingly always run away from major problems, especially if you're humans, but yeah, you just kind of end up on this wild fantasy alien place, and you're just pulling out your guns, your swords, and trying to fight for humanity and stuff like that. And, you know, character-wise, it definitely seems to have some quirky, really bizarre character inclusions, and then also, you know, some pretty decent, I guess you'd say, like, performances and stuff are fine, like, you know, the voice acting, the quality of the experience is decent. It's just, yeah, they talk, like, way too much. They just kind of, like, blab and blab and blab, and that was, you know, a choice for them to do that, which I find really interesting. Is just, like, why is there so much kind of dialogue over and over and over again? And it's like, yeah, you need to do storytelling, but it's also like, wow, this is a little ridiculous. The uranium deposit? Let's get this going. I'm kind of using this time to show off as much of the world as I can, but also setting up all these posts so that if I come back, I'll have, you know, a whole bunch of, like, fast travel points I can use. Like, it's a pretty big map and stuff. Like, you know, there's lots to go and see and end up doing here, and then lots of creatures, and then, you know, as you level, you can take on more of the threats, or they become easier, or some of the threats won't target you as much, which is kind of nice. And oh yeah, then there's the tyrant creatures, and those are extra dangerous. And yeah, there's actually, like, a lot to this game. It's got a really genuinely interesting vibe to it, which I think some people might appreciate a fair bit. Yeah, like a very much like a quirkiness to it, and there really does seem to be a lot to it. Like, it's a lot more complex and in-depth of a game than I was kind of expecting it to be, if that makes sense. Like, I was kind of surprised by it. Let's put it that way. You know, music, style, gameplay. I was kind of like, oh, I'm actually really quite digging what they've compiled here for this game. Like, I think a lot of people will actually really like this one, and if they bump it a little further, I think they'll really like it some more. But, like, it's running fine, as you can tell. There's some drops here or there, but I think Switch players are probably used to a bit more than that. And yeah, you just kind of fight a bunch of creatures, work as a team. Wonder if we could kill this thing without getting attacked too much. I feel like this is way too high of a level for us. And we're gonna get, like, just bopped here. I think we're biting off more than we can chew with this one. But yeah, I kind of like the style of the combat too. Like, I don't mind it. I'm not huge on, like, turn-based stuff, but, you know, you're moving around. It's a little bit like Knights of the Old Republic almost, I would say, right? Like, it definitely works out for it. And they have, you know, bunches of different weapons and tools you can come across, so your combat can be changed up a bit. Yeah. Gotta give this one a bit of a really neat kind of style. Like, it really is pleasantly surprising for what it is. I just wish they would... I think pacing-wise, it needs to be adjusted. Like, I definitely think they should have had someone in there and, like, kind of fine-tuned the story stuff of it, and just kind of, like, tighten the opening, because it just feels like a never-ending, slow, like, kind of, like, just never-ending exposition, never-ending opening story stuff, and it just, like, it definitely did, like, kind of drive me crazy and cause me to be rather bored at times. But yeah, once you kind of get out into the open world, you start doing stuff, start exploring, you're like, oh, this is actually a pretty neat role-playing game. You know, and the shooting and the combat and stuff like that is not bad, so... I think if this kind of intrigues you, it's, you not a bad way to experience things. And I guess the other Xenoblade stuff is stuff I'll have to look into, because apparently it's quite a bit different from this.